The subject matter of this tape is God and Humans.
Welcome, everybody. Glad you could make it. How's everybody feeling today? Good. Good. We're going to talk about a very exciting topic today, and that is the nature of God, the unseen parent. All the time, religious people are telling us that God is a parent. He's a loving parent. But actually, there's so many different concepts about God, isn't there? Some people think that maybe God is just some sort of creative force. God is maybe a God of fire and brimstone, and if you don't do right, God's going to get you. There's all different kinds of concepts about God. And what we want to try to do today is to try to understand the actual personality or nature of God, His character. And, actually this has been a mystery throughout history because, well, we have a problem with God, don't we? Sometimes it seems like God's not so available. Sometimes it seems like God, well, we know that God actually is invisible. And sometimes you may feel like believing in God is like believing in the invisible man, right? Well, where is God, by the way? Does anybody know his address or his telephone number or something like that? So historically we've had a problem with really understanding the nature of God and therefore understanding how to relate to God because He's invisible. But actually we have to qualify that a bit when we say God is invisible. He's invisible in the sense that we can't perceive Him with our five physical senses. But God is very visible in another way, and that is in terms of our relationship of heart with God. But there is a way that God is expressed that we can see in a very clear and obvious way. And actually, if you read the Bible, St. Paul says something very interesting along these lines. He says in Romans 1:20, ever since the creation, God's power and deity have been clearly perceived in the things that God has created. And that's a very interesting statement because it's not just a religious idea, but it's also a very scientific principle that cause is manifested very visibly in the effect. Or we could think of another example. For instance, how many here are artistic? How many like to paint or write poetry or something like that? Well, your character, your mind or your heart, your personality, which is in the same sense invisible, is expressed in a very visible way, isn't it? Through artwork. For instance, none of us here probably have ever met Picasso, right? So in that sense, he's really invisible to us. But if we know a little bit about art and look at his artwork, we can know a lot about this characteristic of this man, his personality, because it's expressed very clearly in a visible way. We could look at the creation in the same way. The creation is a beautiful artwork, isn't it? Really a beautiful artwork. And as Romans 1:20 tells us, God's nature, His character, is also expressed in this artwork, just like your nature would be expressed in your own artwork. So we can look at the artwork and we can know the artist. So God's a very good artist, don't you think? Yes. He's really created a beautiful work of art. And we want to look at the creation. We want to look at everything in the creation, and let's see if we can find a visible nature expressed. So what do we have to look at? There's a lot of things in creation, aren't there? There's rocks, there's cockroaches. Boy, it'd be hard to find the nature of God in a cockroach, but He created it. He created it. Well, we don't want to look at every little thing that God has created, but let's look at the primary categories. What is the most sophisticated thing or the most developed thing that God has created? It would be us. Well, at least ideally speaking, would be man. God created man. And what would be the most basic thing that God created? The most basic unit of existence? We'd say an atom. An atom. So let's look at all the things from Adam up to man. There's a certain hierarchy of creation. And actually, what we're saying is God has created all things. God has created all things, but God is invisible, and his characteristic, his nature, is invisible. It's unknown. But what we do know, according to Romans 1:20, God has manifested himself in all the things that he has created. From the smallest thing to the greatest thing, God has expressed his invisible characteristic in a visible form. So if we look and can find a common characteristic in all things that exist, from man to atoms, then we can understand that must be an expression of the invisible nature of God. So let's look. What do you have in common with an atom? It's sort of hard to compare. But actually, in a very fundamental way, there is a lot of similarity in the way an atom exists and the way human beings exist. If we look at human beings, we can see, even in this room, we see not just men, but we see women, right? Man and woman. And that's a good idea, isn't it? I'm glad God thought of that. And it works out good, because there's man and woman. Then the human race can not only exist for one generation, but can go on from generation to generation. What about an atom? What does an atom have in comparison to that? Well, an atom is composed of a positive and minus particle. So an atom, in a sense, is like a marriage. It's like a marriage. It's like a small family. So there is a comparison. And actually, if we look at every primary level of creation, we can see the same principle of positivity and negativity. And also, actually, Genesis 1:27 says the very same thing. It says that God has created in his image, male and female. So what this means is actually the mode of God's own existence is the oneness of masculine and feminine parts. In other words, God is in the form of a parent. What do we call masculine and feminine parts when they're together, when they're united? That's parents. Ideally, when man and woman come together in love, form one flesh, as the Bible says, then we call that form the form of a parent, mother and father. So this exists originally in God. His image then is the parental form. But it takes something more than just form to be a parent, doesn't it? We can see some evidence that at least the creation is in the form of a parent. At least God's own existence as the image of that is in the form of a parent. But how about in terms of character? You know, a husband and wife can be living under the same roof, and they can be in the form of a parent, but they need something else, don't they? To actually be a parent is something internal, something inside of that mother and father. So we need to find out, is God something more than just form? Is there a character within the form of God? And again, we can look at the creation. We can look at the creation. And again, we can look at man. Man is the best example, because we're so much created in the image of God. So let's look at you. You're more than a form, aren't you? Hopefully. Hopefully you're more than just a lump of protoplasm, right? If I came up to you and said, nice to meet you, you lump of protoplasm. you'd be insulted. And I think they added up, if you collected all the materials that actually compose a man physically, you'd have something worth $1.27. Well, you feel like you're worth more than $1.27, right? At least with inflation. Certainly, you're more than just a lump. You have a mind or a character. You have a form, which we call your body. You have a form, but you also have a character. Some of you are really characters. Mind and body relationship. This is how we exist individually, through mind and body relationship. And actually, this is true, again, throughout the creation. We see through every level, every primary level of creation, this internal relationship, this relationship of internal character and external form. So, again, we go to the atom. The atom has a certain structure, a certain body, a certain form, and internal within it is a mind, or what we call an inherent directive nature. So because we see this relationship on every primary level of creation, then again we come back to the origin of this system. It must be the expression of God's own way of existing. In other words, God also, as well as form, has character. God has form, but also God has character. Well, what is the form of God? What would the form of God? In other words, what is the body of God? You mean God has a body? And maybe you've seen pictures of God in the Bible. He's an old man and he has a long beard. Is that the body of God? No, God's body is much bigger than that. The body of God is the energy of the universe. We're sitting around here and living in this world, and we think this world is so concrete and just so material and so substantial. But actually, even scientists tell us that if you push out all the empty space in the universe, you'll have almost nothing. It's all empty space. Now, that's something I'll let you think about after a while. It's all empty space. So in other words, actually what the universe is an energy field. It's an energy field. And, well, that's really amazing, isn't it? And actually, energy is invisible, cannot be created nor destroyed. It's eternal. So this energy, or we could call it invisible universal energy, this is like the form of God. And actually, a lot of religions really relate to God in this way. Well, God is energy. I've talked to many people that believe, well, God is energy. But to say that God is just energy, that God is just a form and just energy, well, that's like saying you're just a lump of protoplasm. In other words, that doesn't really hit the essence of God, just to say that He's energy. Well, that's His form. That's His, like His body. And what is your body? Your body is a vehicle of expression. So this universal, this invisible universal energy that is the form of God is merely the vehicle of His expression. And behind that is His character. His character. So what kind of characteristics does God have? Well, we can look at His body, His form, and we can learn a lot about God's characteristics. Just like if we look at your body, we can tell a lot about your nature, right? Actually, there are people that study faces, and the shape of your face reveals a lot about your nature, about your character. Now, some of you may be unhappy to hear that, but it's really true. So let's look at the creation, or the energy of God. What are some of the things that we see in this energy mass? We see a lot. First of all, we can see it's being directed, isn't it? It's not just flying around, going every which way, but it's being directed. And it's really expressing certain things that we relate to very, very much, very highly. For instance, if you've ever stood on a mountain at night and looked up in the night sky, what do we see? Or if you ever looked at a flower, did you say, oh, look at that energy mass? No, it was beautiful. You saw tremendous beauty. We see beauty in the creation. Tremendous beauty. Can't we all agree that there's tremendous beauty in the creation? Yeah. I think it's something that we all agree on. You know, I could see in this audience here people from many different nationalities, but we all agree that stars are beautiful, don't we? Yeah. We all agree that flowers are beautiful. So there's an attribute within this energy form of beauty. And how do we relate to beauty? What part of us relates to beauty? Is it an intellectual experience? No, it's an emotional experience. So we can see very clearly that because we see beauty in the creation, we can understand that the Creator must possess a tremendous emotional characteristic, don't you think? God is very emotional. And if you've ever been on a mountain, or if you've ever been in the middle of a thunderstorm, boy, you can realize, oh, this God is really emotional, isn't he? But also if you see the tender, delicate nature of a flower, you can see that God has many aspects of his emotion. He has anger, but also he has tender love, a tender, loving God. But we see something else also when we look at this energy form, the universe, and this invisible universal energy. We see tremendous lawfulness, tremendous order and harmony, don't we? So we see incredible order. Incredible order. And what does that mean? That means that this energy field is not just flying around without any thought or any idea. There's a tremendous idea behind the creation. And that means that God possesses the characteristic of intellect. God is smart. Don't try to fool God, because he is smart. He's the one who created intellect. He is so smart. And even more than being smart, he's aware. He's conscious. Intimately, he is aware of you. He knows you. The Bible says he knows the number of hairs on your head. That means he really knows you well, don't you think? I mean, God's not just interested in the number of hairs on your head, but certainly he's much more aware about the nature of your personality. So this is why always the beginning of self-awareness is relationship with God, because he knows you better than you know yourself. So we see order in the creation, tremendous intellect in God. And also one final thing, we see in the creation tremendous purposefulness. That's a long word. Purposefulness. That means that everything in the creation has something to do, doesn't it? Have you ever seen a squirrel that was unemployed and didn't have anything to do? I don't know what to do. Or is there any atom in this flora that's just hanging around? I don't know. Who am I? Or a tree that's sort of questioning his own self and the purpose of his life? Everything has a purpose that it is fulfilling, and that's why there's such harmony and relationship in the creation, except for human beings, right? We're the ones that are asking all the questions. But we see tremendous purposefulness. Everything has a purpose, and that means that God is a God of will. He has a plan. He has a desire. That's why everything has a purpose and is moving towards the fulfillment of some predetermined plan or idea. God has a will. What is will? It means, it's sort of like ambition, to make things better. Well, God isn't just interested to make things better for himself, but to make things better for his family. He wants to see your life improve and become better. That's the ultimate expression of God's will. So when we're talking about God then and his nature, we're talking about a God of parental emotion, parental intellect, and parental will. God loves you. He's aware of you and is thinking about you. And he has a will for you. And if we can conclude that in every sense God is a loving, caring parent, then automatically we can answer the question, who am I? If God, who created us all, is really our loving parent, then we must be, we must be his sons and daughters, right? We must be the sons and daughters. The fundamental identity of man must be sons, daughters of God, his image. And if we discover that, and in discovering that, we should put that on the cover of all the weekly magazines, don't you think? That's a great discovery. We finally discovered who we are. We're the sons and daughters of God. Then who is that person sitting next to you? Well, that must be your true brother or sister, right? And who are all of us? All of us here, all of us watching on TV? We must be all a part of the same family, don't you think?
Yes.
Then that's great news, isn't it? That's great news. Then that's God's hope. That's his heart, that this world could be a world of one joyful, happy family. And it is our determination, as I hope it is yours, to really contribute our life for the sake of really making the world that way. Thank you very much.
The central point of Kevin McCarthy's lecture, God the Father, are, first, God is invisible, and his nature is expressed in creation. Second, God's nature has both masculine and feminine attributes. Third, God is the loving parent of humankind. And fourth, as children of God, we are brothers and sisters.
Then, let's say God is thinking about the day. Then he's thinking about entire 360 days continually, each day, marking each day, or he is remembering special days.
Special day.
What do you think?
Special day.
그럼 하나님이 나를 주는데 스페셜 데이가 무슨 날 거냐?
Then, when God has certain reason to remember a special day, what would that be? What is that special day then?
왜 이래서 같이 데이가 나죠? 그거 생각할 때, 스페셜 데이가, 천사 세계를 다 만들었을 때에, 끝났다 할 때가 특별한 날이든가, 시작할 때가 특별한 날, 그런 말을 가능할 것이다. 천사를 만들 때, 천사가 태어났다 할 때가 특별한 날일 것이다.
God is not yet created the entire universe. This is the genesis of the history of God, and God has not come into being yet, all right? So, in logic, if anybody want to remember a certain day, they will either mark the beginning of certain things, or the consummation, end of certain things.
천사는 천사를 지을 때에, 천사 짓고 날 때에 하나님이 그날을 기억할 것이다.
For example, God must remember the day he created angels. For example.
그래. 만물 짓는 것들도 그 전부 다 고난들을 기억할 것이다.
Then I'm sure God remembered the day when God initiated the action of creation of all things.
거기는 우리의 모든 초목, 모든 만물간 초목, 광물, 식물, 동물 있지만 그들이 전부 다 지은 날과 완성하는 날, 그 전부 다 기대가 할 것이다. 그 역사가 있다면 그렇게 기대될 것이다.
I'm sure God is very meticulous God. He must have a good diary. then every time he created a new thing, new plant, a new tree, new animal, he marked in the diary, I created a rabbit today. I created the grass, I created lilies, and so forth.
자, 이렇게 볼 때, 그 조그만 그 뭘 할까? 조그만 뭘 쓸 때도 없고 덕벌레도 놔두는 것이 있을 것이고, 그 다음에 완성될 것이 있어. 덕벌레로서 완성할 때 있을 것이다.
Then even the creatures such as the very poison insect, very dirty, smelly, very tiny, poison insect. I'm sure there must be a time that God initiated the creation of that insect, and there must be a time that God finished the creation of that insect.
그럼 그 역사에 기록돼서.
Again, that poison insect, it goes into the diary of God.
자, 만약에 기록 안 했다면, 하나님이 기록 안 했다면, 그 인섹트가 하나님 남들은 다 읽고 나와 덕벌레가 왜 하나님이 같이 지어놓고 나와 기록 안 해줘 참사할 것인가?
If God forgot to, post the date and the beginning and ending of creation of that insect, the poison insect must be, protesting to God, saying that, God, Mr. God, what happened? You recorded everything else except me. My birthday, you didn't record it. What happened to you? Well, because I'm your creation too.
참사가 나라.
What about? The poison insect has the right to say so?
자, 그럼 하나님, 이놈아, 너 독이 있기 때문에 안 줘. 그럼 하나님 못해.
Then God will say, shouting back to the poison insect, that the reason I didn't, record your, beginning and ending, because you have a you have a poison. I don't like the poison. Well, if that is the case, then he's not a real good God, because he actually put the poison into it.
포이즌가 그 인섹트가 돼가지고 고맙게서는 나는 하나님이 기억할 수 있는 것이기 때문에 괜찮아. 이럴 수 있는 그런 조건이 들어있다.
Poison, talking about. The poison insect is saying that I still deserve the recording because of my poison, to give God, you, my Father, the added reason to remember me. The poison as a condition that you can remember me. I'm a special because I'm a poison.
하나님이 기억한 데는 잘난 사람이나 너나 마찬가지다.
So either you remember good, really noble and sacred things, and I remember, like me, that there was the poison insect. Well, as long as you're remembering something, we are both in the same case, same rate, same level.
너들도 그렇지?
What about you?
너들 이제 부모가 있다가 그 나라 대통령이 있으면 말이야. 그 군무원에서 태어났는데 호적에서 빼버리고 날도 기억 안 하고 그렇다 이러면 그 나라에 대해서 원망하고 부모님에 원망하고 나아간다.
What about? You're born as a citizen to a certain country, but that country, register, recording everybody's birth except you, omitted your own birth. What do you think? You have certain disgrace and a complaint to that government?
부모예요.
How about your parents? The parents. Why didn't you record my birthday in my register?
그러니까 나는 거야.
Yes? Do you? Yes. Would you do that?
자, 그러면 하나님 속에서 제일 나를 기억하려면 무슨 날이 제일 이렇게 볼 때 무슨 날이 제일 좋은 날이겠느냐?
And again, think for a moment. Which day or what day would be most memorable to God? Which day is most unforgettable to God? If God wanted to remember a certain day, what would day would be like? What would that day be?
마음 좋게 기억하려고 했으면 사랑하는 아들이 태어나고 딸이 태어난 날이다. 그걸 다 반대할 수는 없다고.
I'm sure no one can deny God will take a joy to remember the day when his loving son and daughter were born. Is that right?
자, 로빈슨이 태어나고 좋은 날로 생각했는데 이거 좋은 날만 기억하고 싶겠나 나쁜 날을 기억하고 싶겠나?
What about? God would like to remember only joyful days or even some sorrowful days, some bad memories, day of bad memories. What do you think? He would like to intentionally shy away from it, or what do you think?
아?
He would like to shy away from it, but I don't think he can.
너들래?
What about you? What about your tendency? What kind of tendency do you have?
Shy away from it.
자, 그러면 뭐 좋은 날, 아들 생날을 선거만 기다리지 아들이 죽을 날을 기다리는 사람 없다고.
Normally, is it true that no parents are waiting for, the day of death of their children? They're waiting for the birthday of their children. They want to celebrate. They want to look forward to.
사랑하는 아들 딸이 태어난 날이 제일 기쁜 날이다. 그 날이 없어지는 것을 제일 슬퍼할 날이다. 그런 말이에요.
So we come to the conclusion, as far as the father, the parents are concerned, the most joyful day is the day of the birth of the son and daughter, loving son and daughter. Therefore, on the contrary, the other way around, the most sorrowful day would be the day of death of his son and daughter.
그래가지고 하나님의 기억대로서 사람을 지어가지고 자기 아들 딸이라고 해 지었다면 그날 기뻐할 것인데 그 기뻐할 수 있는 사람 꼴이 이모나다 이모나.
So the day God's son and daughter were born and children were born here on earth, that must be the day that God take a great delight and to remember that particular day. But the status of the children is very clumsy. No, from the father's standard, from the God standard, God yardstick, we are very inadequate.
사랑하는 사실을 나눠서 보니 그것이 뭐 어머니 아버지 앞에 뭐 향수를 갖다 주는데 똥수를 갖다 주고 오줌수를 갖다 주고 냄새 향수가 뭐야? 시퍼간 반대 냄새를 피우고 있다.
The children are supposed to honor the parent, God, and let's say in a great day that the children brought some gift. Happened to be that gift has happened to be a perfume. And the children thought that it was a very great perfume. But according to in the smelling nose of God, that perfume is to smell like human waste. Or
하나님 그 냄새 맡을 때 좋겠나 나쁘겠나?
what do you think? When God sends such smell, would he feel good or bad?
제가 그 스멜이 아이고 태어난 아들을 아이고 이놈의 자식 태어났어 안 했으면 좋겠다 이렇게 돼야 되겠나 아 이래도 좋다 할 수 있어야 되겠나
하나님께서 하신.
그렇지 그너 그래도 좋다 할 수 있어야 되겠나
Then what do you think? God, knowing or recognizing that particular smell of the perfume is terrible, all right? Still, because it's coming from his own son and own daughter, he must rejoice over the gift, or he should express his displeasure. What do you think?
좋다는 무엇이 필요하나 하나님에게 무엇이
Then there must be something else that 하나님을 기쁘게.
하나님 그러니까 하나님의 무엇이 있어야 되겠나 이야
또.
거기 하나님 눈으로 보기도 그거 싫어하고 냄새도 싫어하고 그러니까 맨지기도 싫어하고 이거 듣기 그거 뭐똥 싸는 소리도 다 싫다고 어쩔 싸는 다 싫다 다 싫은데 뭘 다 좋게 버리면 무엇이 해야 되겠나
So for God, everything, no matter what, even though it's clumsy to his eyes and clumsy to his ears and very bad to his nose and nothing really pleasurable. But yet there must be some element that make God that unconditionally everything, embrace and God embrace and everything must be source of rejoicing. What are those elements, do you think?
이건 뭐라고?
What did you say?
고차적인 것 고차적인 그 무엇입니까 고차적인 것
Something noble, something high, something out of this world or sacred.
그렇기 때문에 그런 것이 뭐겠냐 사랑일 것이다 에?
What would have that kind of substance? Or probably the love or love. Love might do it.
Run to love. Run to love.
그런 것이 그러면 하나님을 생각할 때 하나님을 느끼게 될 때에만 태어난 그런 나를 기억하는 것보다도 그 똥을 싸고 냄새 피워도 그 좋아하는 그 순간에 자기가 생각할 때 볼 때 사랑이라는 걸 두면 삼고 사랑을 알 때 그 순간하고 모든 것이 하나님 앞에 더 기억할 만한 순간이다.
냄새나는 걸 볼 때 하고.
그렇지. 태어난 아들하고 말이야. 아들 태어났으면 평소였으면 사랑이었던 그 냄새를 다 싫어하고 다닐 것인데 사랑이라는 걸 누구 삼고 냄새라는 걸 커버할 수 있는 그 사실을 느끼고 좋아할 수 있는 하나님이 되었다면 그 하나님이 그 사랑이라는 중상공을 때 기억할 만한 일이라는 게 아니겠냐.
Well, just the mere fact that the son is born and a daughter is born, and that is just a memorable day, probably a memorable moment for God. Well, in addition to that, that child is bringing very much displeasure. But God is embracing his son and daughter, disregard of displeasure, or uncomfortable smell, or whatever, uncomfortable appearance, because of love, and embracing with his children, and ecstatic joy is come back to him. Now, just a mere birth, and here they're evoking the power of love, and which moment would you think is more memorable to God?
뭐 사람이 나는 나를 생일날 기억하는 것도 가져갈까 사랑하는 그 느낌을 두고 삼고 매일 그 순간에 그 시간을 너무 가지고 있던 그 생각할 수 있는 귀하게 생각을 어디가 두게?
What do you think? Mere perfunctory, or perfunctory, just superficial remembrance of the day of the birth of his children. On the other way, that is, day after day, there is a stimulation of love that is stimulating the heart of God. And day after day, that the excitement of love or intoxication of love is just sort of overpowering God. Now, which is more meaningful to God, more value to God?
자, 그럼 세컨워드. 그럼 하나님이 말이야. 하나님이 그 기대 애기 낳을 때 누워서 똥을 싸고 기대는 거 좋아하나? 기대는 거 좋아하지.
What about God as a father, as a parent, looking at the baby? His son and daughter were just born, and the baby is crawling all over the place, sprinkling all kind of dirty things, and the mess of all things, and put the finger in every pot, what do you think? God feels certain joy out of that scene?
Yes.
오줌 싸고 똥 싸고 자꾸 하면 뭐는 자꾸 큰다. 그 둘러서 자꾸 먹고 자꾸 이제 자꾸 크고 그다음에 몇 달 되면 없어서 배늘하고 길고 그거 다 좋아하는 거. 왜 좋아하겠냐?
So child is doing all kinds of incredible things, and there's no limit. The messing up the thing, and going around, hopping around, and he could not control his bathroom, he cannot control his passing waters, and he's passing his stools everywhere, and even sticking his finger into his own stool, and all kinds of, and drinking a lot of milk, and getting a lot of cereal. Well, each marking, each event like that, what does it mean? For parents, those miserable events are marking the growth of the child. So by doing that activity, my son, my daughter is growing up.
그 growing up 하고는 말미암아 하나님의 마음이면 사랑의 그 움직이는 박자가 growing up 할 수 있겠느냐, 내려갈 수 있겠느냐.
What is it? When the children is growing up, step by step, toward the higher status of existence, then while the children is growing up, the intensity of the parental love, also God's love is also growing up parallel?
Yes.
Or is decline, or increase, or decline?
하나님이 현행하면 아이들도 현행 같이 하고 하나님이 웃으면 같이 웃고 하나님의 슬픔을 같이 씹어 전부 다 닮아간다.
And while child gets bigger and understand their God, which is Father, and then understand that there's a certain communication of emotion is possible. When God laughs, shall also smile. When God look at certain direction, shall also look at a certain direction.
자, 그게
And,
전부 다 자라가지고 부모님 하는 걸 다 말도 할 줄 알고 다 활동을 할 줄 안다. 그걸 볼 때 하나님은 더 높은 사랑, 더 넓은 사랑, 더 큰 사랑을 가질 수 있다. 그 말이 하는 거다.
So but the child is grown up, totally grown, and is doing everything that God does. Walk, behave, do things, make a decision, make a judgment, and do things, and exactly like God does. What do you think? God would feel very sad or alienated, or he feel even greater fulfillment?
자, 그런데 그러면 사람은 지금
Welcome, everybody. So good to see you tonight. Tonight's topic is the three blessings. The three blessings. God gave man three blessings in the beginning. Probably you've read Genesis 1:28, where God says to Adam and Eve, "Be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion." And also you probably know of the story where Adam and Eve lost faith in God or disobeyed God's plan, God's instruction, went against God's commandment. And the result is this fallen world. So we've seen a history of strife and inhumanity to man, man being inhumane to man. We've seen war, we've seen starvation, we've seen all manner of evil. And even in ourselves, we've experienced contradictions and hardships. And as St. Paul said in Romans, he said that there's a war going on inside, a struggle between good and evil. And I'm sure we've all experienced that when we want to do good, there seems to be an opposite power working against us. So I think the general flavor of religion, all religion, is that man is somehow separated from God, that man has to come back to God, that man somehow has to overcome his sin, his problem, his iniquities, and reestablish his relationship with God. But you know, one thing that's missing, I feel, is a very clear understanding of what we are returning to. In other words, what was God's original plan when he created this world? What did he want when he created? And what kind of world did God want to see when he created man and the universe? Sometimes we don't think about that. But we need to understand that clearly, because ultimately this has to be the goal of religion, to restore the original ideal of God. So if we look at the scripture, we can see that God was planning a world of goodness. When God created, he was creating a world of goodness. A lot of people think that God created evil, that God created the serpent in the garden to tempt Adam and Eve, that God created this being that's called Satan to tempt man, to see if man will be faithful or not. That God somehow created evil as a challenge to man to see which way we would choose. But actually, the Bible shows clearly that evil came about as a result of man going against the plan of God. So what was that original plan? God said to be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. It was very good. Everything that he had made was very good. This was the end of his creation process. Adam and Eve had been created. He gave them the three blessings, and he finished by saying, everything that he has created is very good. He didn't say, Well, it's mostly good. It's pretty good. Well, I did my best. But doggone it, this little bit of evil is here too. Or also I have to create a little evil to challenge man, to test man to see if he's going to be faithful. He didn't say that. He said it was very good at the end of the sixth day, and then he rested. So what is God's ideal? What was his original plan for man? Certainly, according to the Unification Principle, the world that we are living in today, the world that we've seen through history, is not the world that God wanted to see. Is not the reason that God created. God wanted to create a far different kind of world, and he wanted us to be completely different kinds of people. So let's try to explain then the meaning of these three blessings. To be fruitful, to multiply, and to have dominion. What does this mean? Well, let's start with the first blessing. To be fruitful. What does that mean? Does that mean to plant a bunch of apple seeds and to grow a bunch of fruit or something like that? If that were the meaning, then probably Johnny Appleseed would be the Messiah. Well, to be fruitful means something else. To be fruitful means to obtain perfection. To obtain perfection. And what is perfection for God's sons and daughters? God's sons and daughters, for Adam and Eve. What was the perfection that God wanted them to achieve? Does it mean that they would just be, of course, perfection sort of has maybe a bad meaning, like you never make a mistake or you're just super intellectual or something like that. But actually, when God told them to be fruitful, he was talking about the perfection of their heart, the perfection of their love. And that's why they began their relationship as brother and sister, not as husband and wife, but as brother and sister, because they had to first individually perfect their love, so that in perfection then, their hearts would be one with God, individually. So Adam's heart would be one with God's heart, and Eve's heart would be one with God's heart. There'd be no separation between Adam and Eve and God. So this means that their mind and body, centering on God, would be in perfect harmony. There'd be no separation or contradiction between their spirit and their flesh. Their spirit and their flesh would be in a perfect, harmonious relationship. And the result of that, well, word and deed. Their words and deeds would be one. Their words would be truthful, and their actions would be truthful. So their mind and body would be in perfect unity, centering on God, and therefore they would become individually the incarnation of God. The incarnation of God. So actually, we know of a person in history that was exactly like this, and that was Jesus. So Jesus actually fulfilled this first blessing. What Jesus became was exactly what Adam and Eve should have become, incarnations of God's Spirit, by perfectly harmonizing their mind and body, centering on God. So that actually the individual would be a perfect expression of God. So as you would see the individual, you would see God. We would call that a divine person. A divine person. What did Jesus say? He said, as you see me, you see the Father. He didn't mean that I am God himself, but he meant I am an incarnation of God's Spirit. Because my heart and God's heart are one, then as God feels something, I feel it. As God moves, I move in the same direction. So, therefore, perfect man, perfect woman are divine expressions of God. True people, a true person. That's wonderful, isn't it? And we can see right away that we're not like that, are we? Again, St. Paul talks about in the letter to the Romans about the war going on inside of him between his spirit and his flesh. This is our situation because, in fact, this ideal was never achieved by Adam or Eve. But also we see that, and let's move on then to the next lesson. So this fruitfulness then is like a prerequisite to the next lesson, which is to multiply. To multiply. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean, let's see, 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 4 is 16? Well, multiply means marriage. So we can see that there's a very important prerequisite here to marriage between Adam and Eve. The first marriage of all mankind. There's a very important prerequisite, and that is in this fruitfulness. God is saying to Adam and Eve, okay, before you have love between each other as husband and wife, first, consummate your heart with me. Each of you become an incarnation of my spirit. And that incarnation is the prerequisite for marriage. Perfection is the prerequisite for marriage. So we can see already another difference in the world, that that kind of concept doesn't exist, that we actually have to become the incarnation of God before we can be married. But why is that so important? And especially with the first man and woman, why was this incarnation of God's Spirit as a prerequisite for marriage so important? Because God wanted to be involved in the lineage of man. God didn't just want a relationship with Adam and Eve, but he wanted a relationship in the resulting lineage that would come from Adam and Eve. So if Adam and Eve would have had a perfect relationship with God, both the incarnations of God, then and completely standing as the image of God. You know, God created man and woman in his image, male and female. This means that God himself is existing with masculine and feminine parts in a state of oneness. So therefore, the natural direction for perfect man and perfect woman is marriage, that they come together in a perfect, God-centered love relationship. And what God puts together, let no man pull apart. But this love relationship would be impossible to separate. When perfect man and perfect woman would come together in perfect love, centering on God, it would be as impossible to divide that man and woman as it is to split the atom. You know, it's so hard to split the atom. The atom, by nature, will not divide. The positive part and the minus part will just come together, and they'll form something greater we call an atom, the basic unit of matter. Well, true man and true woman in a true love would be the same way, one and inseparable. The idea of divorce, what's that? There'd be no concept of divorce. It would be impossible to divorce. Completely impossible. This love would be eternal. And we would call this man and this woman then true parents. True parents. So Adam and Eve were meant to be the true parents of not only their own children, but the entire lineage of man. So from this foundation, we would see a true family, and this true family would then expand to ultimately a society, and this society would expand again to a nation. And this nation would expand to an entire world. An entire world. And what kind of world would that be like? That would be a world that would be an incarnation of God's Spirit. So God wanted to incarnate in the individual, then incarnate in the family, incarnate in the society, incarnate in the nation, incarnate in the world. What kind of world would that be? A world that manifested the incarnation of God. Well, that's what Jesus meant when he said, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That world we would call the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven on earth and also then in spirit.